and welcome to the 2023 Cleveland Jobs with Justice annual celebration. My name is Steve Haleko. I'm with the Cuyahoga County Progressive Caucus, which is one of the partner organizations for Cleveland JWJ. And before we get started, I want to introduce the Cleveland JWJ Director, Deb Klein, who is going to talk about the exciting raffle that we have to have at the end of the program. And she's going to try to convince you not to get off early.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, please don't leave early because we do. We have a raffle that's coming up. I'm going to show you. And first of all, thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. I am going to show you what we have for auction items. So we have actually 5 baskets. IRTF Fair Trade gift basket worth $140. 2 baskets, book baskets, but the most important book in that basket is the signed copy of Labor, Power, and Strategy. John was nice enough to donate 2 of them for our raffle tonight and that strike. And then the future we need is a book that was written by Erica Smiley and Sarita Gupta. Erica is the current executive director of JWJ, and Sarita was before Smiley. Then we have a Penzies $50 gift card for those of you that are not in the Cleveland area, because I know we have a couple people that are from out of state. Penzies is an infamous store in Cleveland, Ohio that sells great spices that hates Republicans. So we all like going to Penzies and giving them business. And then we also have a Union Swag gift bag that is priceless. Since I've put prices on everything else, we have a Jobs with Justice t-shirt, a Caring Across Generations t-shirt, Baker's Local 19 sweatshirt, which I have one and love and wear it a lot in the winter, a Teamsters 236, I believe, hat, and then a Baker's, I guess that's a beverage holder or whatever. So those are our baskets. When I stop sharing screen, I am going to now put how you can get your tickets for the raffle. They will be $25. You will be entered in each of the gift baskets. And I'm going to put 2 links in the chat. One of them is you can text to donate for those of you that like to text. And the other one is a link that you can click on to donate. I'll be watching and putting the people's names up on the wheel. And if you prefer to send a check and do not want to use either one of the electronic methods, you can let me know in the chat and I will enter your name in and trust you'll send the check because I know you will. So I'll put everything in the chat and I'm going to turn it back over to Steve.
Well, Deb mentioned author John Womack and his classic book, Labor, Power, and Strategy. And we are very pleased and honored to have John with us tonight. He's coming to us from Cambridge, Massachusetts, which he said had lovely weather this afternoon. John has authored several books on the history of Mexico and other pieces on labor everywhere. He wrote Labor, Power, and Strategy because of his deep interest in Mexican industrial labor, which is like industrial labor everywhere else. He published a book about the bottlenecks or choke points in the production of goods, services, and transport, which are strategic positions which labor can use not only in their own negotiations for disruptive power, but for disruptive power of the overall economy as well. In 2018, Peter Olney and Greg Perusik interviewed him about the book and organized major scholars to comment on it. PM published the result, Labor, Power, and Strategy. We hope it will become a pocketbook for labor organizers for decades to come. So please welcome author John Womack. And let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you, Steve. Um, I'm glad you mentioned that. I spent most of my working life as a professor of Latin American history, mainly Mexican history. And after I'd written the first book on country people, tenant farmers and sharecroppers, I decided I'd write something about Mexican industrial workers. And and during research, I came across in Mexico City, a city then in the middle of the revolution of maybe 350, 400,000 people. Um, that there were in 1916, there were three big strikes which shut the city down. And I found in every one of them that it was the trolley workers, but more important, it was the electrical workers. So, and I thought, what is this going on? And so in doing further research, it turned out that there was a sizable number of some few thousand electrical workers in the city, but what really counted was the hydroelectric plant about 60 miles or so northeast of the city, and there were only about 100 workers there. And so when these 100 workers shut down the hydroelectric plant, all the power went off, including to the trolleys in Mexico City. And the trolleys mattered because there was no Union Station there. In order to move freight from one train to another, you had to pack it on trolleys. And so these 100 workers could basically shut down a city of 400,000. And later, it turned out that there were big railroad strikes in the 20s, and then it was a matter of people in the machine shops and the telegraphers. There might not be more than 500 telegraphers, but they could shut down a workforce of 25,000 by not dispatching orders along the line. So then I thought, since all these people are actually using machinery manufactured elsewhere, and the machines work in one place the way they do in another, is this going on in the United States and in Europe and elsewhere? And so I started a big project looking into strategic positions, which was an idea I got from a great sort of labor scholar, John Dunlop, who later became Secretary of Labor under Gerald Ford. Um, and yes, it turned out that there were some, not many, but some really very interesting studies, both of scholars, but also of practitioners in the labor movements in Europe and in the United States. And so, anyway, I wrote about that. And that was the thing that Peter Olney discovered, and that's sort of on the basis of our connection then. And with Glenn Perusic, we put together this book, which the Labor, Power, and Strategy. And so that's how I came into this subject from kind of distant beginnings into a very concrete, in fact, everywhere you see it, kind of question: who depends on whom at work, and who can, by stopping his or her work, stop the work of many more people. Now, those are strategic positions, as we call them, choke points. And there are, let me talk a little now about the some 3 strikes that are going on now. The UAW strike, the SAG-AFTRA strike, which continues, has been going on since last July. and now the Clemente, the Kaiser Permanente strike. The UAW strikes are about something like over 1,700,000 people working in the automobile industry in the United States, and not quite 150,000 of them are in the UAW, in Michigan mostly, in Ohio and Indiana. The simple things at the start is that the UAW has a strike fund of $825 million. And if all the workers went out at once and stayed out, it would exhaust this fund in something like 90 days. And compared with that money in the bank, the Stellantis, which is Chrysler, Fiat, Peugeot, has 74. I counted. I think the Wall Street Journal counted them. 74 days of unsold inventory in all the United States. Ford has 64 days of unsold inventory, and GM has 50 days. And so, if not all the workers are out, they can the car makers can truck many cars and trucks from unstruck plants to dealers. But if there aren't any particularly the big money-making cars to truck, then they're sort of out of luck, and they have to go with the few that the dealers have. The first three strikes were about, I think, something like 13,000 more or less at a GM plant and at Wentzville near St. Louis, which makes GM Canyon and GM Colorado pickups, both of them big money-making car pickups for Stellantis. Ford in Wayne, Michigan, another of the first three plants the UAW struck, makes a Bronco SUV and a Ranger pickup, also big money makers. And Stellantis at Toledo makes Jeep Wrangler SUV and Jeep Gladiator pickup, other big money makers. The UAW has some powerful demands. 40% raised wages, now dropped a little bit. COLA demand, and the abolition of tiers, and union jobs in these new electric vehicle plants that the car makers are planning on developing. They plan over $100 billion investments for these cars, about half of them in the Union Week South. Now that's over 1 million new jobs altogether for this investment. The nature of the UAW strike so far is what they call a stand-up strike, but it's really a selective strike. And it's reminiscent of a strike that the airline attendants did in 30 years ago against Alaska Airlines, where something like 25 workers in different places had intermittent strikes, but they so embarrassed the airline that they won for the whole union. They won a big victory. The UAW can't do intermittent strikes, but it can do these selective strikes. And if Wentzville, Wayne, and Toledo don't give them a victory, they can call out other big money-making plants. For instance, the GM Arlington Assembly Plant, which makes Cadillac Escalade, or the Ford's Kansas City or Dearborn plant, which makes F-150 pickups, or the Stellantis, the Sterling Heights and Warren Truck Assembly, which makes Ram 1500s. The choice of this strategy of selective strikes, of this particular selection of strikes, is aligned with a particular kind of theory that I think, well, it's theory and practice, that Tom Jurovich at the University of Massachusetts has concentrated on developing. It's on striking profit centers where the company makes most money. Now, that's what they study and teach at his Labor Studies Center and on what they call strategic corporate research, find out where the profit centers, for instance, at Amazon, where they are, and to try to mobilize strike action around them. And this is different from what I argued in that book that Peter and Glenn Perusik and I've done. There, I focused on these choke points, and I argued that labor should try to hold them and use them. For instance, there are in most, in an average car, I suppose, something like that, there are 30,000 individual parts to make the thing. Some of them are sort of cosmetic, but some of them are essential. Engine blocks for the internal combustion engine, or starters, or brakes, or axles. GM has, and without the parts, without those parts, those essential parts, you can't have a car. And for instance, GM has of its own 5 transmission plants, and at Bedford, Indiana, Kokomo, Indiana, Romulus, Michigan, Saginaw, Michigan, and Toledo. Stellantis has 3 transmission plants of its own in Kokomo, and 2 in Kokomo and 1 in Tipton, Indiana. Ford has only 2 at Livonia, Michigan, and Sharonville, Ohio. If you strike them, they can't make cars or trucks. And already, there are something like, I read, I think yesterday, there are something like 2,000 non-striking GM workers can't work, though they're not on strike. They can't work because the parts aren't there. Eventually, then, in fact, sooner than later, everything goes down. It's not, those strategic strikes aren't what the UAW wanted, or decided at the start. They wanted the profit centers to strike and see how far that got them, and it got them a little ways with Ford. But it seems to me that they were betting then their strike fund against GM, Ford, and Stellantis inventories to save as much of the strike fund they could, to see if when how long the car companies would stand their inventories running down. But to see who'd break first. But a week ago, or it was maybe now almost 2 weeks ago, they struck 38 plants. These were so they were parts distribution centers. Basically, there are warehouses. There are some, I think 18, they didn't strike Ford. They struck GM, 18 distribution plants at GM and 20 at Stellantis. But those are places where the inventory of parts are. So if they strike, you can't produce cars in the other assembly plants. So that's, it seems to me they have now moved from, wisely, from the concentration on the profit centers to a concentration on these choke points. There are some questions I know that have come up in the labor movement about whether selective strikes made sense. Should Sean Fain have really called out all, I think there's something like 50 plants in the country, and called out all 146,000 union members. And it would have put a pretty definite scare into the industry, but that's running the risk that you'll run out of the strike funds before they cave. So there's a real question about that, and we'll see, whether Sean Fain was right. There's also some question about the look of the strike. If there shouldn't be more, let's say, less of Sean Fain and less of Biden on the picket line, and more of individual workers with Fain, but at least showing them as they appear. I know that locally, when there's a strike at a plant in Mansfield, Massachusetts. It's one of the 38 that Fain called out, and it gets a lot of play in the Boston and Massachusetts papers, but nationally and on national television, not so much. So there's a question there too. But we'll see how these stages of selective strikes, how effective they are. The other strikes are, it seems to me, well, the SAG-AFTRA strike. It's the Screen Actors Guild and the old American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, and they're professionals, and so almost everybody has a strategic position. You can't run a show without anybody like that involved. And so they have a huge effect on Netflix, Walt Disney, Warner Brothers, and a lot of other medium scale media firms that can't go on the air without these people. So that seems to me it's almost inevitable that you have kind of choke points strategy in that kind of industry. There are now something like 160,000 members, I think, active and inactive. Active members, I think, are probably more like 100,000. But they're strike all across the industry and all across the country. I think mainly probably since that's where a lot of these firms are in California, but the media companies, but they're all across the country. Kaiser has, I think, something like almost 40 hospitals and over 600 medical offices, mostly on the West Coast in California, Washington and Oregon, some in Colorado, and some in DC. But there, at those hospitals and medical offices, there are something like 75,000 workers now. It's the biggest strike in the healthcare industry in U.S. history. It's a coalition of 11 unions, mainly the different SEIU locals and unions. But again, these are largely staff workers, nurses, X-ray and lab technicians, sanitation workers, pharmacy workers. These are people you can't run a health system without them. They're not doctors and skilled, the most skilled people, doctors. They are the people on whom the doctors depend. Sanitation workers are not highly skilled. They have skills, or they wouldn't be able to do what they're doing. It's, I think, unskilled is a misuse of the word, but they're not highly skilled. But without sanitation workers, you can't run a hospital. That has to be cleaned up every day. Without sanitation workers, you can't run a hotel. The people wouldn't stay there without things being cleaned up. And so these are all choke points where a few workers, especially in different departments, strike, then other people can't work. And if they're willing to, they will happily join the strike. But in any case, they can't work. The place shuts down without the essential strategic workers. Um, the I would really try to. That's what the book, in a way, is about. And without being, it does touch also on some other sorts of strikes, the kind of the teacher strikes. I think 2 or 3 years ago, in West Virginia and in Oklahoma. Those are skilled people, not in the sense of mechanical skills, though they may have them at home. But if they don't go to work to teach the children, then not only the children go without an education, which is no immediate loss, though over the years it adds up terribly, but their families are without day-long babysitters. And my daughter was a first grade teacher for 25 years. And she said, you know, it was clear to her that the families often looked on the teachers as their babysitters. And so when the teachers go out, it affects everybody in the state, in West Virginia and in Oklahoma. Anyway, that's how the book, I think, relates to labor struggles almost of any kind in any industry, and how workers do have power if they look at it and see what they how who depends on them. It's not only the boss but other workers. Um, and if they begin to study, and it's workers who know this kind of position better than anybody else, because if they think about it, they know more about it than anybody else. And one of the things I liked about the book was the commentary of some of the contributors about how this had really raised the furor among the people that they discussed it with, and they said, "Yes, of course. Now I see." And so that's what we hope, that this will bring people to examine their workplace and the parts that they have in it, and what depends on them, and what they can move by taking their own action.
Thank you, John. I just want to comment on one thing you said, that when folks are on strike, it helps when other workers join them. We can actually do that this Saturday. Our UAW brothers and sisters at the Stellantis factory in Streetsboro are on strike. And you may have gotten an email about this, but Saturday is a solidarity day of action. So if you can make it down to Streetsboro to join our brothers and sisters on the picket line, that would be great. And Streetsboro kind of sounds like it's a long ways away, but if you take 480 East until it ends, you're right there in Streetsboro. So it's got like really good access. And like I said, if you can make it down there Saturday, that would be great. Before we get to questions for John, Deb, you want to talk a little bit more about the raffle?
Of course. We do have people who have entered. I think we have 5 now. So if you're interested in putting your name in for the raffle, please click on the link. If you don't want to do it electronically and would rather send a check, put your name in the chat and I will enter you into the raffle at the end. So what we're going to do now for questions is if you could raise you've got 2 choices. You can either raise your hand using the reactions down below on your bar, or you can put a question in the chat and I will be watching that and can ask those for John. So does anybody have any questions for John? So we have one. Can you talk a little bit, and this is from Susie Scullin, can you talk a little bit about the disconnect between historically popular support for the unions in the United States coupled with the declining union density?
About the disconnection between, I'm sorry, I didn't get the rest of it.
It's disconnect between the historically popular support for unions in the United States coupled with a declining union density.
Yeah, the increased support, I think, is only in the last few years. Basically, since I think the so-called Great Recession, which was a miserable depression for a lot of workers and their families. The decline has been going on since Reagan, the last 40 years. When he broke the air controller strike, that was sort of a symbol. But everything that he pushed and everything that Republicans have pushed and everything that too many Democrats have followed their push in the last 40 years has meant the declines in membership. Counting public employees, that is, AFSCME, and other such unions, I think they're only something like 10% of the labor force now is unionized, or maybe 12%. Private industry, I think it's under 10%, and if this new wave of the last 2 or 3 years, and especially this summer and fall, if that continues, and you get a breakthrough in something like the UAW, where they get a union hold on these new EV plants, that would double the size of the UAW. If the IBT can somehow move Amazon workers to get through the breaks and obstacles they face in unionizing, that would make a huge difference in the transport industry. And so it would be certainly then well over 10%, and you'd have a growing labor movement. But all that is, the economy is a very different kind of animal now. Businessmen aren't at all used to taking advice from labor. They think they have lived high on the hog for the last 40 years, and they haven't. And they're like, it's now like a 3rd generation of people living high on the hog. They think they're kings, and they see no reason to deal with labor. And so they'll have to learn a lesson. Whether that can be taught to them or not, we'll have yet to see. There is a real disconnect, but it's hopeful. I do think that once you get a union installed in a particular industry, the popular support for it may well somewhat decline. For instance, Starbucks has I forget how many, but 10,000 different plants, different shops And I think only like 300, I think it's many more than that. But the Starbucks unions have only like 300 plants so far unionized. If people all of a sudden have to start paying much more for their coffee because they're union workers, the support for them may go down. But if you get a real union in industries, that's very hard to reduce once it's there and building. It's not like Starbucks. I wish them all the best, but it's not the same there. So we'll see how this plays out. There's no, you can't predict it. And I'm not going to get all starry-eyed about how the union is on its way, but I do think there's hope now, in a way that for some years that it was really seemed pretty bleak.
So I actually have a question, John. We're seeing a lot, and it's funny because Susie asking the question just reminded me of this because we just experienced, the two of us just experienced this with someone. We're seeing a lot of work sites that are interested in organizing, but instead of affiliating themselves with a union, they're starting their own independent union. What do you think about that concept? Instead of joining a union that has the power of an international or national, it's just that unit in one work site.
Well, I think that's great. I mean, I think you don't need unions. This business of choke point means you don't need a union. All you need is the solidarity of people in strategic positions. It's the disruption that forces a union or the accommodation of the boss to the union, to the organized workers. Organization, in that sense, I mean, I'm all for unions, but I don't think organization is the same as union. And so if you're in a plant or just a shop, a coffee shop, then if you organize yourselves, whether you call it an association, a society, a guild, or whatever, I think that's good. You defend yourselves, and then if you find others you want to join or they want to join you, then that's great. And you start to get bigger, but you don't need to be bigger to protect yourself in your workplace.
So we have another question in the chat. You mentioned the lack of media coverage of striking workers as opposed to coverage of union presidents and sympathetic elected officials. Are you aware of efforts by the unions to achieve more personal coverage, which probably would increase understanding of the public?
Well, I think reporting is now a little better about unions because these big strikes, and also because of the Writers Guild strike. I think that helped. And as writers join that WGA, they can they see the point in it. But there is a disconnect. I mean, Jeff Bezos has no interest in unions. He runs a huge media affair. And all these big newspapers are all anti-union. They may put up with the unions that they sort of bought into when they bought their place, but they don't like it, and they'd be happiest to do without it. But so they're not. But there are reporters have gotten somewhat more, I think, sympathetic with these new movements.
So we have another question. What can we do to show support? What can we do to show support to the unions that are striking? I think that that's probably what you mean. John?
Oh, well, what can we do to support unions that,
Yes.
well, like Steve Paleko said, if there's a union on strike in your state, and or at least near you, then find out what it is and see where they're striking and go out and march with them. And that's, I think, the best thing that unions, when they go on strike, it often people think, well, it's just they're striking for themselves. But when unions do better for their members and their members' families, they're doing it for everybody. Sometimes the unions don't behave that way. They behave as if it's only about their own struggles. The Teamsters used to do that. They don't. They didn't in this latest confrontation. But and the teachers, when they went out on strike, that was clearly a strike not for themselves, but for children and the children's families. And so I think the more strikes can show, the more unions on strike or the more organizations on strike can show that they're really for everybody, then the more people will, I think, find ways to support them. Letters to the editor, somebody I saw wrote at the bottom of the screen. Yes, that too. But it's most important, I think, that you go personally and find them, the people, and work with them.
I can tell you for all of the people that are on tonight that are from the Cleveland area, if we have a UAW strike in the Cleveland area, because we have 4 locals where there's a possibility they could go out on strike from Avon to Cleveland. And if that happens in this area, we will definitely be showing solidarity by doing strike support. We did it when I see Margie Chambers just jumped on. When UAW 1005, when GM went out on strike, we took supplies over. People went out and joined the strikers on the picket line. So there were a lot of things that we will be trying to organize and get done if we have someone at one of the locals here in the Cleveland area. So if you're interested, if you are not on our Cleveland Jobs of Justice list and you're in the area, please make sure that you do that. You get on our list, because then you'll know when something is going on in this area. Do we have any other questions? Yes, go ahead, Randy.
Okay, I spent most of my working life before I retired working for nonprofits. And the nonprofit sector is very large in the United States. And something I've noticed just recently is that a lot more of these nonprofits have union representation. And I wondered if you've noticed that, or if anybody else in this group has noticed that. And that's a very big thing, because in the past, if you even hinted of organization, then the management would say, "Well, what's the matter? Don't you care about the tenants, or don't you care about the community that you're serving and all?" And they kind of like guilt trip you on this thing. And recently that has kind of faded as nonprofits have grown to a significant portion of people in the country. And I just wondered if you had any comments on that.
No, I've noticed that too. And I mean, it used to be, if you work for a nonprofit, it was sort of a charity. You were doing it out of the goodness of your heart, and you didn't need anything else. But I've noticed with real interest and pleasure that more and more of these nonprofit centers are unionizing now. and I read about it often, and good for them.
If I could just, I just want to make a comment. There are a lot of nonprofits where the workers are looking to organize, but then we also have some of the nonprofits that you would think that would be union friendly that are fighting the organizing. And I think one of the standout ones for me is the Southern Poverty Law Center. They were fighting the union. They finally now have a union down at the Southern Poverty Law Center, but of all places that you would think that wouldn't be anti-union was anti-union. I used to make a monthly donation, and I stopped my donation and won't donate anymore to them because of what they did. But the point is that the people that you think would be in favor of unionizing and taking care of the workers are sometimes worse than the corporate bosses. Because that was pretty startling. And when I called, I actually did call and say, hey, I'm canceling my membership. I'm not donating. I'm never going to donate to you again. All they said was, okay, that was it. And I told her why when I, when I canceled. But I think that's the other thing, is that showing support in some of these places that are trying to organize. And if you're donating, if it's an organization, a nonprofit, and you get wind that there's an issue, because there have been a couple here in the Cleveland area as well, call up and tell them that you're unhappy. Get involved in that way. That as a donor, you want them to make it easy on their workers unionizing. Do we have any other questions? No other questions? You sure, everyone?
Yes. Oh, did I go out? Can you hear me?
Go
Yeah,
ahead, Margie.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah. We don't know if the Cleveland GM or Ford plants will be going out this Friday, but just like Deb said, if there's a strike around you, please come out and support. And they operate 24/7. So whenever you have an opportunity available, some of them are started building a food bank pantry type, so you can take anything, especially at night, something hot. Yeah. But thank you for all this, even thinking about supporting this drive. Thank you.
Just so I can tell everyone a little bit about Margie. Margie, you were the vice president when 1005 went out on strike, right?
Yes.
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 So we went out there quite a lot and took supplies a lot. So that's what we'll do again. Because I remember calling Margie and saying, so what do you need on the strike line? And she said, I think it was that, or it might have been, but I'm almost positive. She said, they just want donuts. So sometimes sometimes, it's something like, okay, we need to take donuts. So again, if you're in the Cleveland area and you want to get involved, if any of our locals go out on strike, please make sure that you let me know if you're not already on our list, because we will be doing the same thing that we did for 1005.
Thank you. And let me know how much I owe you for the ticket I bought.
Oh, don't worry, I will.
Yeah. Okay.
Anything else? So Marjorie said thank you a couple times. I want to say thank you to author John Womack, to Deb Klein for all that she does, to all of you for showing up, and to those of you who participated in the raffle. Thank you very much, and good night.